Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar. Um, my name is Elizabeth Errico, and I am the Executive Director of the Children's Mental Health Resource Center. For those of you who are new to CMHRC, we are a nonprofit charity organization that provides guidance and resources for the early identification and management of mood disorders, bipolar disorder, and its new phenotype dubbed fear of harm in children and in adolescents. We provide a multitude of services for families and as well as the practitioners who treat them. These disorders are isolating for children and families, and they're complicated for providers to treat. So we at CMHRC are here to break down that isolation and to provide the support that everyone needs to ensure that children get an accurate diagnosis and treatment that works. You can learn more about our programs and services on our website. That is www.cmhrc.org. On our website, you can make a contribution to support our work. You can join as a professional or family member and access additional resources reserved just for members, like a full archive of all of our webinar recordings. You can also reach out at any time through email to info@cmhrc.org. Now, tonight, I am speaking with a special guest with decades of experience as a mental health care provider working with children and families. As we speak, please feel free to put your questions into the chat. I'll be monitoring it and integrating your questions into our conversation as we go. And so our guest tonight is Steve Hoersting, who's a licensed psychological practitioner and certified behavior instructor for autism, who has provided mental health services to children, adolescents, families, and adults for over 25 years now. Steve has a diverse background. He's worked at Baylor College of Medicine, University of Houston Child Development Center, and the VA Hospital Medical Center. He was a school counselor for Boone County and founded the counseling program for Covington Independent Schools, both of which are in Kentucky. Steve's experience in private psychiatric and psychological settings within schools and at treatment centers allows him to provide specialized care to children, teens, and families, as well as to collaborate with other professionals. He does not believe in a one-size-fits-all approach, which he has outlined in his book, Maintaining the Truth, a parent and caregiver's guide to help children and adolescents accept their gifts. I am thrilled to have Steve here with us to discuss this book and his work with children and families. So, welcome, Steve. Hi.
Hey there.
Welcome. We're so glad to have you with us.
I'm really glad to be here.
So, Steve, for starters, did I get anything wrong in my intro in sharing the information about your background? Is there anything you'd like to correct or add?
No, I think you've got it pretty well there. The good stuff anyway. I've got a lot of other stuff.
Well, tonight I think we're interested in talking to you about your book, Maintaining the Truth. I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of background on what prompted you to write the book in the first place.
Actually, a couple things. One is life experience of being a neurodivergent individual myself. I didn't realize it until I was advised of it when I worked with a psychiatrist, and he told me I was. But and then I read some actually several books, but one in particular by an author, Malcolm Gladwell, and I was just intrigued with his whole concept of how we default to the untruth, and he talked about how through history this has happened. Adolf Hitler, and people said, oh, he's fine, he's okay, he just wants a little sliver there. So when I read that, I started thinking about the kids that I work with every day kids. I call them kids, adolescents, children. And the fact that so many times, on the paperwork that I get in, things like that, people cross out, teachers maybe, we cross out and say, where it says can't can't pay or doesn't pay attention, they'll cross out and put chooses not to pay attention.
Mm.
Attention. And it's like uh, that I don't believe that. And the research doesn't show that. They don't get up in the morning, at least when I ask them, I say, you get up in the morning and say, I think I'm not going to pay attention all day today and see if I can make everybody mad. And they usually say no. Yeah.
It it's something that we encounter a lot in our work is this idea that all of the behaviors that children or adults exhibit must be choices. And it really doesn't take into account the degree to which many things are not choices. They're not willful and intentional, but they may be a side effect of a medication or of an illness or of simply being non-neurotypical. And and I've heard you talk about the degree to which, our world is defined by the neurotypical and all the expectations that people have are based on the neurotypical. And I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about that. I know that it's in your book, but I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about it now.
Yeah. Matter of fact, his conversation with one of the adolescents today about that, you know, he he's really having trouble accepting that he has a neuroatypical outlook and that kind of thing. Total denial, not accept, just denial. Well, we talked about that, I told him, I said, look, the world is made by people who are neurotypical. Well, they can think outside the box. They can pull things together. They can do all this kind of stuff. But those of us that are, neurodivergent or neuroatypical, well, we can't always do that. We ADHDers, we get stuck on something, and it's like it's good, but we need that boss up there at the top to define, stop, get back on, that kind of thing. The person who has autism, that they think in a that linear literal sense. That's not the way schools are designed. You go from class to class to class to class and every personality is different and whatever, and that really starts in middle school. And I don't know about you, I bet you do that. That's when it seems like the big you know throng of people come to me is when they hit middle school, because it's,
Hmm.
especially again, you think about all the neurodivergencies, if you're dyslexic, if you're all of those things, that that it's created by people who say this is how you need to learn to read.
I'm sure that there are a lot. I mean, I see this all the time. There are sort of dictates on how people are supposed to do things. And when someone can't do them following those expectations, especially in childhood and middle school and adolescence, it really starts to influence how those individuals perceive themselves and perceive their abilities and capabilities, and how they see themselves as people, and that's a really delicate time in the development of self-esteem, self-efficacy, confidence in one's competence to be able to manage the world. What are your thoughts on this? What have you seen within your practice with kids and adolescents who sort of have to absorb this neurotypical standardization that we have in the world?
Well, yeah, because they're young, of course, and they don't, now, I mean, there's more access as they become teenagers, access to the internet, that kind of thing, which can be good and can be bad. But they, many times they come in and I will say to them, so do you think you're smart? No. What makes you say that? What's your evidence for that? Well, I'm bad at math. So if somebody's bad at math, that means they're not very smart. If I ever run into Albert Einstein, I'll make sure I tell him about that because, as we know, everybody knows that he was dyslexic, but very few people know he really wasn't good at math. He was good at science and all that other stuff, but not that. So, yeah, I didn't have the information to be able to figure out what was going on. So that's when you develop, in my opinion, you develop that we call it RSD. Most people who have neurodivergencies end up with it, which is, that rejection thing that, okay, yeah, I guess I believe you, mom. Yeah, I guess I am smart. And then you go to school the next day and you take a test and you bomb it and you look back at the test and it's like, oh, I knew that. I knew, yeah, I'm really smart. Yeah.
Mm.
And so I had, another conversation with somebody that read an article and oh, can't find it. Go believe that one. But it was talking about that exact thing that we have to be so careful about the opposite of saying, no, you're smart. You're good. You're okay. Because if you have inside your head that you're not, then it almost feels argumentative. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
what, you don't believe me? I mean, yeah, and
Yeah.
so
I talk about that with families all the time. This idea that in order to bolster our children's confidence and self-esteem, we tell them they're smart, they're pretty, they're, whatever, fill in your adjective. But if it doesn't align with their perception of themselves, they actually come away from that interaction feeling as though they've been lied to, they've been misunderstood, and that the evidence that the world is presenting to them is misaligned with this loving, caring adult who's trying to help them feel better about themselves.
yeah,
And so
right.
it's sort of a catch-22 that you can't say, no, you're very smart. Because they will have a list of reasons why they don't think they're smart and why their reasons trump your, kindness. And it really can backfire and make kids feel like that adult isn't trustworthy. And that sometimes exactly what you just said, saying, well, show me the evidence that you're not smart, and
Right.
being able to walk them through having an understanding of what measures are even being used to determine that, can do better at unlocking that idea of, oh, I'm not good enough.
Yeah. And then along the way, the problem also because even if we do a good job with that, if like I have a friend who's a doctor and I tell kids, I said, he can't sit down and read a book. So he must not be very smart, right? Right. How could he be a doctor? Well, because he's visually impaired, so he has to use Braille, to do that. But so I do try to trick them sometimes into falling in that. But the problem is that outliers, that's the next thing, is here's Steve thinking, maybe I am okay. Maybe, I'm too hard on myself. So my wife happens to not be home and her, I call it the boat, is usually there. She's probably getting after me right now listening. And but it wasn't there. So we have this telephone pole. It's been in the corner there for 30 years. So my Jeep, I hop in and their car's not there. So I just whip the wheel around and boom. I've got I had to get every bell and whistle and everything on there so I wouldn't run into stuff. And what do? I bump it. So of course I said, oh, Steve, you're human. It can happen to anybody. No, I don't. Not even close. No. And then the people that love you, usually they don't want to hear that. So,
Well, but it sounds as though that's an internalization of those, again, those societal messages that say that making a mistake means you're a mistake.
mhm.
That our choices, our behaviors, our mistakes become characterological. I hear that so often when working with children and families, oftentimes from schools, sometimes from extended family members, this idea that because the child's behavior is difficult, the child is difficult. This is a difficult kid. This is a bad kid. This is a problem child. Instead of reframing it as this child has a problem that they need help with, or this child has challenges that they can't manage on their own. And really, there's no reason for that to have to stop with adulthood. To be able to keep that framework and perspective in place really brings a lot of compassion to how we interact with others. Um, but but I wonder, you know, what we can do as mental health professionals, as parents, as teachers, as educators, what can we do to help kids and teens so that they don't develop those negative self-perceptions, that negative self-talk that are really rooted in those societal expectations of neurotypical norms?
Well, I think to me, the thing, and I believe is information and the proper information. Just like, I mean, your network and the webinars that you do and things. I mean, gosh, to hear people talk, and I had gone to one about ADHD. I've been in this field for almost 40 years, and certain things, I've got, we have to go to conferences and things all the time. Well, long story short, if I can ever do that, I'm listening to Russell Barkley talking about at the very end of a thing about ADHD, and as a clinician, that you have to have, these 6 symptoms for inattention, for instance, in 2 different places. Yeah, duh, I know that. So he said, so if you get a teacher that sees 3 of those things and you have a parent that sees 3 or 4, whatever, then you've got 6 or 7 of them. And, there's a good chance they're ADHD. And I was like, what? No,
Mhm.
it's 6 here and 6 there. No, no. Well, nobody ever told me that. And once again, what my first thought was, oh my gosh, you're so dumb. You didn't know that. Well, as it turns out, there's a whole lot of my colleagues that didn't really know that either. And you're reading the DSM, and which is the whole thing. But reading that, most people wouldn't get that impression either. So by educating ourselves and really knowing what is dyslexia is not seeing numbers backwards and letters backwards. 80% of it is of people who have dyslexia is phonetic awareness, being able to sound things out. They can't do it, so they run against, come against a word they don't know, and or they're surface dyslexic, where they don't recognize easily the 20%. That's even worse, because try to sound out, if you're really good at phonics, try to sound out the word SIGHT, doesn't work.
Mhm.
English language is one of the worst. So yeah, I think it's education, and that's really hard, because people have grown up hearing all of these things. I know there's things I probably think about certain car models that were told to me by my dad over and over again, and they may or not be true at all. But I don't get in a situation maybe where it matters. But with this, it's, across the board. So, if when I was growing up, oh my gosh, do you ever shut up? You're driving me crazy. You're making me insane. What's the matter with you? Can't you like sit still? Well, so you see some kiddo that does that, and you either identify, or maybe you had a parent that said, oh, look at that kid over there. Those parents, they don't even care. They just let him do whatever he wants. They're, you can tell they're just not good parents. So, you say, you become a teacher or a mental health professional or whatever, and you don't know, or somebody doesn't enlighten you on it. They come into your office and they act, like that. And what do you think? Can't you get Can't you get control of them? Can't you, do that, whatever? And so it goes on.
You mentioned Russell Barkley. He's the author of Parents as Shepherds, Not Engineers, right?
Mhm. Yes. Yes, I love that. Ever since I read that, ad nauseum, I use that term with people. And what's really so cool is working with parents who really do that job. But Dr. Barkley was very careful about, I think he did not want to make somebody feel badly, because he said we really have a limited amount of effect, so as shepherds, we can provide the space for them to, grow and nurture and stuff. But there's this big thing outside of there, this big ring. So if we can put them in a spot where if they get outside that ring, there's, less chance that they're going to be devalued and all that stuff. We we try to do the best we can. And unfortunately, then I think that can be easily perceived as, oh, so I have to move into the rich neighborhood where, blah, 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 and whatever. And that's not what he was talking about or going for.
It reminds me of a little expression that a friend of mine's father used to use, where he used to say, "We don't raise children, we grow them." Um, and uh, the idea that our job as parents and as supportive helping adults in a child or adolescent's life is to help them understand their value, so that that is instilled, um, in a sort of rock solid way, so that when they go out into the world and that starts to get chipped away at by life experience, it's a solid foundation for them. And I'm not sure that that's something that most parents nowadays are encouraged to do. It seems to me that a lot of parenting nowadays is about pushing their children to meet milestones early, to outdo everyone else so that they can sort of stand out from the crowd. But I don't think that that's a healthy way to grow a child. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about as well.
Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of recent research conducted about, like high school sports, for instance, and that, they're not saying it's a bad thing, but for a lot of adolescents and it can be a very negative thing because, it's probably different now, but, I remember trying out for the basketball team, 4 years in a row and 4 years in a row standing in the back and, and everybody going forward and like, okay. And, but luckily I had swimming and swimming was different. Swimming was based on, not who you beat really. It was based on your own personal accomplishments, your times, you're moving forward. And I think that was the one thing. I mean, my mom, she is absolutely totally responsible for that. Put me on there at 6 years of age. And I know why she did it because it was the only time she could get any peace and quiet because my mouth would go water. But nevertheless, she was smart enough to do it. And I mean, it really it took me to college and then to meet some professors and things who, and it's still, though it's sad because because of those other things, it's still really hard to believe when people are telling you, you're this, you're that. For example, the neurotypical. Okay, what do we know about like entrance to college? What do they base so many things on? We know grades, okay, and that could I can understand to that part. But what's the other thing? Testing, right?
Testing.
Standardized tests. And what do we know about standardized tests? They're timed. And why are they timed? Because it saves money. Because they don't want to pay people to stand around for a whole day to wait for somebody to get done. Okay, fine. Well, that's okay. I mean, it's okay. I like that. But what about, the guy who makes straight A's in graduate school and then goes to the doctoral program, to apply, and they already tell him he's in. So it's not like, but he has to take the GRE. And most people get 1500s when they're going in grad school, stuff like that. Again, keep in mind, he already did his thesis and, all that stuff. They were going to let him use that for his dissertation. Well, okay, so he takes the GRE and he gets 1060. So what's that person supposed to think? I guess I just work hard. I'm obviously not smart. I don't care what they, because we didn't, that person didn't know about ADHD back then. There was minimal brain dysfunction, but I'm probably glad I did not get diagnosed.
Well, when I'm hearing you tell that story, it brings to mind the idea that our cultural fixation with outcomes has made it so that we discount the hard work as irrelevant,
Yeah,
and that the only thing that matters is the ultimate score that someone gets on a standardized test or on an assignment, instead of looking at the amount of effort, work, and attention that that person put into being able to complete that task or assignment. And that really does skew things in favor of the neurotypical, for whom those tests and most school assignments are designed.
right.
Um, Whereas, you know, it's perceived as a uh, going easy on the individual to take into consideration their effort. But in the end, I would argue that the effort is what matters, because the effort is demonstrating the person's follow through. It's demonstrating the person's determination. It's demonstrating the person's ability to commit themselves to a task. And when it takes more energy and more uh, having to harness more attention in order to complete it, that seems to me like the person who is more committed to themselves and to their work than the person who can go in there and get a 1500 without studying.
Yeah, it's a real conundrum that it 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 is important, and but it's hard to measure. And like you said, what came into my head when you were talking about that was, that if you say to somebody, well, like for instance, you have dysgraphia. So, hey, how about letting, the child use voice to text? You've got Dragon Speak, I use, and voice it. Well, but they won't learn to write, if they do that. That's just making it too easy. Well, I would say, well, if you think about this, you could break it apart, give them two things to write, that may take 5 minutes or something, and kind of critique it. But then if you want to know what they got out of this book that they just read, or the science part that they just read, if they can, dictate it, you're liable to find out a whole lot more about what they know. And it really does still take effort to do that, and you have to read it. But the difference is you have, success, and almost from what I know, every human being, that's where you learn to not avoid, you learn to do. Because I use this example, and it may be a crazy one, but I use the example of said, okay, so you go in the kitchen and your mom says, hey, look at that really pretty red thing on the top of the stove. Isn't that beautiful? Go put your hand on it, touch that thing. Well, okay, well, fine. So it heals up. And so next week, your mom says, hey, honey, look, the red thing's back again. Go put your hand on it. And I don't think so. So does that make you dumb or arrogant or defiant? No, it's pretty smart. Like, I know this is going to be really hard and painful, and I'm not going to do it. And for people who have different things, I mean, I have young women, I call them, that come in and they're sophomore year in high school, that think they might have ADHD because they're spending 5 hours a night doing homework. They've been doing that for like 5 years. And so I usually say to them, so I don't get it. What are you saying? You all of a sudden you want a life or something? What's up? What,
Well, when you're talking about this, I'm thinking about the number of times that I have heard parents and teachers and school officials use the words avoidant and oppositional,
Mm.
and as sort of as a slight. This person is just avoiding their work. They're using whatever to avoid their work. They're being oppositional. And I always say the same thing. Well, why are they using it to, if that's true, why are they using it to avoid their work? What is it about the work that is so daunting to them? And shouldn't we be addressing that piece of it? Because because I think also in reference to your specific example of the writing, you know, it's a very elementary approach to the concept of writing, that writing is somehow about physically using your fingers to put the words onto a page, either through writing or typing, but that writing is actually the process of formulating ideas and putting them together in a way that communicates those ideas effectively towards others. And whether a person does that writing with a pencil or a keyboard or a voice to text software, it's still writing. And I think that that's really important. Yeah, I see a question come here. She says, what do you say to parents who often say that their child must learn to function as the world is right now, because later an employer won't cater to their differences? Likewise, I've had schools say to parents that it is not good to make too many accommodations because, quote, what are they going to do when they get to college? I have thoughts, but Steve, I'm very curious to hear yours.
Well, what I would say is that number one, it's always a not a, I mean, it's a continuum. So it's not a, okay, well, you're only going to do one page and you're in first grade, so we'll just continue that all the way through. I mean, that's part of the problem that I know is that when I taught special education, I was tried to be good at moving things forward, but I'm human, very much, and so it's easy to get stuck in those goals and to stay in those goals and not move forward. So I'm so glad that I have parents that I work with who who push those a little bit. Hey, can we help this a little bit for Johnny? The other thing is it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop with. I mean, but I I know that kids who that I've worked with who go to college and and they either, some colleges like the undergrad where I went to, and I have some relatives have gone there, and they said they have not finished with my math and a test, and the professor would say, well, hey, no big deal, my office right upstairs, just finish it up and bring it up when you're finished. I mean, you know, it's like, okay. And that's even without having any formal documentation. Now, most, I mean, and there's a bigger push to have that, they has to transfer. And as far as employers, I mean, if they recognize effort, like you said, effort, they recognize effort, and if they recognize that you have it, then I mean, they will make allowances.
Mhm.
And if they don't, guess what? Let's see. I'd like to count how many different, companies and things that I've worked for. And if you look around my office behind me, you won't see a lot of people there, because I've kind of figured out that working with just me is probably my best bet.
Mhm.
Except, Christina.
I taught college for 10 years, and I cannot recollect a single time that a student came to me and shared a concern, made a request for an accommodation with or without paperwork from the student services office, where I didn't make the accommodation that they needed. Because I think the goal is to learn, not to learn in a particular way. And I think that colleges today are really learning that themselves and putting that into practice. And there's an incredible privilege that comes with adulthood, which is that we're able to make choices on how we want our lives to be structured, that facilitate our own stability and well-being, like going into independent practice rather than working for an established company if the parameters that they have don't work. Kids don't have that privilege. Kids and teens are forced into a system that wants them to function like everyone else. And that is a grave disservice to them, because eventually they will have to be able to make choices and decisions for themselves on how they want to structure their life and what will be best for them emotionally, psychologically, and practically. And if we don't start giving them the opportunity to learn what those things that they need are and how to get them, it will cause them to have unnecessary, potentially traumatic experiences as an adult as they try to carve that out. And in this era of there's all these different parenting styles. There's helicopter parenting and free range parenting and feral parenting and all of the rest, tiger moms. But there's this new one that I read about recently called snowplow parenting, when snowplow parents are the parents who try to clear the path for the child. And this is somehow a bad thing. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard teachers say things like, you prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. I cannot tell you how much I disagree with that. The idea that you would not help your child learn what their strengths are, learn what their weaknesses are, help them remove obstacles so that they can feel competent, so that they can feel capable, so that they can have a sense of confidence in themselves, that they can manage the world, that self-efficacy. Why we wouldn't do that is just absolutely bizarre to me. Especially when we're talking about kids who are not neurotypical, because their needs are different. They're experiencing those obstacles differently, and they need that scaffolded support, to borrow a term from Vygotsky, that scaffolded support to get them to feel confident in what they can do and then expand that range. So to the person who asked that question, I would say, you could tell them to go jump in a lake, because they will be able to make and receive accommodations in college and as adults. And that's not actually how the world works anymore. And making them abide by that when they're in elementary school, middle school, and high school actually does those students a disservice.
Yeah, because again, it is instilling in them that there's something wrong with them, as opposed to, I'm Steve and I have certain things that I'm good at, and certain things that I need a little, different approach to and stuff. And as my typing teacher told me back in high school, watching me after I don't know how long, but she said, Hoersting, I'm thinking that you probably should just go ahead and take those caps off the keys, because I don't think you're ever going to learn to type. Now, people go, that's horrible. No, actually, that was really helpful, because I passed the class and I was a lot less frustrated. And she was right. I mean, I call it typing, but most people would not really call it typing.
Well, I think that gets to the idea that there's this myth, if you will, that the way we build up confidence in children and teens is to tell them that they're good at everything. And that can't possibly be true for anyone. And so in reality, the way we build up confidence for children and teens is help them understand what they're good at, what their strengths are, what things they're not so good at, and what things they're maybe not good at because they haven't put forth enough effort, versus what things they're not very good at because That's just not who they are, and it doesn't have to be. I don't lose a lot of sleep over the fact that I'm never going to be a starting center for the New York Knicks. Like, that's not in my wheelhouse. And had someone tried to push me down that path, I would have failed miserably. But knowing what your strengths are and pursuing those and allowing children the permission to let go of the things that don't work for them, I think is extremely important in terms of building up their sense of confidence in themselves and that they don't have to be like everyone else to still have value.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was one study that I talk about often that they found that most people, decide whether they're smart or not in seventh grade based on math. And so you can imagine how many of the people that are neurodivergent, I mean, walk away if that's indeed true, then they walk away that I'm not smart. I can't be this. I can't be that because, I, or, I can't spell, so I could never be a writer. Grammarly kind of helps a little bit with that. But anyway, you know, but that's cheating.
Right. And that I'd be very interested in reading that study, incidentally, because it very much aligns with something that I've observed over the years, which is exactly that academic confidence that tanks during middle school. And yet we don't talk enough about the social, gender, racial, cultural differences that mean that people are going to perform differently in academically, especially in subjects like math. A kid who has dyslexia maybe isn't going to do as well on word problems. A child who is very focused on a narrative and literature, and they're maybe way better at word problems than at just having numbers on a page. A child who struggles with dyslexia may often need to have only one problem per page so that they're not being distracted by other numbers on the page. And so it strikes me that without acknowledging all of those other not even neurologically based differences, but social differences, we're setting up a whole bunch of kids to grow up thinking that they're not good enough simply because the work that they were being asked to do was standardized to such a degree that it didn't play to their strengths.
And what's I think really interesting about that is it brings up the idea of for years we tried to we recognize that young women, high school age, middle school age, whatever, they were dominated by the males. I mean, I'm not saying that the males were, we were trying to do it, but we're louder, we're, whatever. And so in math in particular, I mean, if they had a question, I mean, hey, I'm back. Well, they get lost and shoveled. So we worked really hard to take care of that. And we didn't. The latest research says that we have not done that at all. And I read an article, it was really sad, about a woman that thought she was really good and wanted to be an engineer, and she went to Harvard. And when she went to Harvard, which still tends to be male dominated, she went to Harvard, and she was used to being in a smaller environment where people helped each other and stuff. And in that environment, as you said before about the competition factor and stuff, if she had something and she had a question about it, nobody would help her because, well, if I help you, you're just going to get a better grade than me, and so I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And so she quit and went in a different path and went to another place. And clearly, she had what it took to be there. But
Right.
it's real easy to make your decisions, like you said, based on peripheral information that it's not based on. It's not based on fact. That's why what you're doing, I think, is so important because you're giving people access to finding that, finding the facts. What does this mean? I mean, I just think I wish there was like maybe it will happen, a you where all the things like that we have with the ADHD and all this stuff, people could go to a spot where they knew it was going to be overseen by people like you who, don't just throw it out there, and don't investigate.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, you know, uh, one of the things that you and I talked about another day was you and I talked about the quote, "Every child strives to feel safe, accepted, and competent." I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that notion that, yeah, again, you get up in the morning, you don't care, or you get up in the morning, you want to make your parents angry or whatever. No, I mean, again, research tells us that kids, they want to be successful, they want to be accepted, they want to be competent. And about age 3, this is where theory of mind, plays in. Because about age 3, kids who are neurotypical, about age 3, they develop theory of mind. They see their mom put something on the table and it falls off. And about then, they reach down, pick it up, and put it on the table. Well, maybe the kid with, the attention deficit, or the other, neurodivergent kinds of things, they they don't notice it, they don't see it, they don't whatever, but so they see other people doing it again. So that whole sense of I'm not good enough, I'm not, competent enough. And I do believe they keep trying. They most of the time they keep trying. But again, those outliers, I mean, you know, okay, take care of your milk. Don't spill your milk. Now, you don't, do anything with your milk. And so they try really hard. And then what happens? Somebody says something, they move their hand and goes all over. They didn't do that on purpose, but all those other things get wiped out, I think, by that one event. Now, sometimes handling it a different way, minimizes it, but still, they're not. Matter of fact, it may not be proper, but what I say to kids many times is after, if they have like, unhappiness and whatever over their situation that they find themselves, I tell them, I say, I can fix that real easy. That really? Yeah. That if they're older, they'll say, what, with drugs or something? No, I'm not a doctor. I said, no, but I can fix that really easily. I said, your biggest problem is, you need to be dumber. If you were dumber, then you wouldn't know that you were like supposed to know that. And so you'd be just like, okay, fine, yeah, so, I'm good. I'm okay. Because, where do they come up with those expressions? Ignorance is bliss and all that kind of stuff. I mean, so I just go get my drill and I tell them, I said, hey, if you want to, I can, we can take care of it. Haven't had anybody go for it yet, thank goodness, but
I can see why you have such a rapport with young people. One of the things that I thought of while you were outlining the milk analogy is the degree to which we're comfortable accepting certain mistakes from our children and not others. And that a toddler who spills their milk, a toddler who can't tie their shoe, we don't hold them responsible for that. But a kid with dyslexia who can't stand up and read in front of the class, a kid with ADHD who can't sit still for an hour-long lecture, we hold them responsible for that as a failing rather than as something that is to be expected given the struggle that they face. And that breaking out of this idea that there are standards that everyone should follow that are based on neurotypical patterns would go so far in creating an environment for children and adolescents to grow up believing in themselves rather than believing in their inferiority. And I think that's a lot of what your book really is talking about. It's about making sure that those kids today that we're parenting, we're teaching, we're guiding, grow up knowing that they are perfectly okay, despite the fact that they may have differences from other people, and that those differences don't make them better or worse than anyone else.
Yeah, it to me it goes. You used said the word should, and that's I never have done it, but I keep saying that I want to have a sign up here that should will not be spoken here. But I usually point to this wall over here, which there's nothing but the Texas thing on it, when I'm talking about it, because I talk about the 10 shoulds. I said it's pretty universally accepted. I said if you came in here and told me, Steve, I just killed my best friend and I feel really bad about it, I'm not going to say, well, accidents happen. I mean, come on. I mean, I'd say probably you should feel bad about that. I mean, that's right, But so there's 10 of those things, but none of those are like you should know how to tie your shoes by the time you're 5 years old, or you're worthless, or
Hmm.
you should. But there's so many things that, before there was all the, I guess, the information, whatever. I mean, what do we got? We get it. It's passed down, and if
Hmm.
it's not dealt with, and stuff, then we just, we go on thinking the same untruths as my book talks about, the untruths. And it's just so easy because the biggest thing about trying to go against the untruth is if you're a teacher in a school and you've got Johnny or Susie in your class, and you said, well, they really just need some extra time, or they need this, or they need that, whatever. And then the next day, let's say the people buy into it and they believe you. And then the next day, who knows, for whatever reason, he has a meltdown or she has a meltdown, and whatever. Then what does that make you look like? Oh yeah, 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 Bambi Pamby land there, yeah, right. All he needs is a little extra, this. And so, I mean, some really tough ones can, continue to push. I know a couple in particular, and but it's real easy to fold up your tent and say, well, I guess I was wrong. I guess what they said was true. He just doesn't want to learn.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I've never met a kid who didn't want to learn, who didn't want to be accepted, and didn't want the approval of the adults around them and their peers. And I think that when we look at it from the standpoint of uh, leveling the playing field and making sure that every child has an equal and equitable opportunity to learn, um, there will be fewer kids left behind. Um, Now we're just about out of time, and I want to honor everyone's time. But Steve, I want to give you an opportunity to plug your book, and to tell us how we can find you on social media, and how we can buy your book.
Well, people that know me really well, intimately, will tell you that yeah, Monday, I had the hiccups all day so badly. I thought surely I was going to have them today because I was just completely freaking out. So, well, with the help of some very, very, very nice people, Holly in Florida, hopefully she's listening, but Carol Graphics, she redesigned the cover and the book, whatever. She helped me to get it on Amazon after I spent, oh, I don't know. I think I was 63 when I started. I'm 69 now. So, but anyway, I did get it on there the first time, but then for some reason I didn't get it back on there yet. So she helped me. So it is available on Amazon. I got notice today that it is up running, maybe a day before it's available. So, to go to, I guess it's just Amazon.com and type in the title, and it's 16.95 on Amazon, and then you can and then you can get it there. The other thing is I have two websites, but the one that I have developed for my book and hopefully others that will come is A-Z neurodivergent publications.com. And there is a link on there where you can fill out a form and I can then get in touch with you and make the book available, because supposedly it is getting printed now as we speak. I have 1,000 copies coming, so I probably have 999 left. I think I promised somebody to give them one. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
And if anybody is interested in getting that that URL, please email us at info@cmhrc.org, and we'll be able to pass that along to you. So just a quick review before we wrap up of what's coming up next for CMHRC. We have next week, we have a clinical seminar just for professionals on differentiating bipolar from ADHD. Next month, we have a webinar on April 19th that is all about a new strategy in parenting that we're calling palliative parenting, all about how to improve quality of life for your children and your family, despite living with special needs. And next month, we have a clinical seminar on April 26th, again, just for professionals, entitled How and Why the DSM Fails Providers and Their Patients. And we're going to take a deep dive into the history of the DSM, how it was developed, how it was designed to be used, and the shortcomings that it has. We also invite people to visit our website at cmhrc.org, so you can take a look at all of the programs and services that we offer. If you're interested, you can make an appointment directly through our website to speak with us. We are a 501c3 nonprofit charity. All of the work that we do is supported and subsidized by our community of donors. So if you are able to make a contribution, our webinars, our clinical seminars are free of charge. But like a museum, if you can make a small donation, it is greatly appreciated. You can reach us on Facebook at Children's Mental Health Resource Center, and on Instagram at cmhrcenter.org.
And I'm on Facebook too, by the way.
Oh, Steve, what's your Facebook handle?
It's Steve Hoersting Psychological Services.
Fantastic. So reach out to us. We look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events. And we are so grateful, Steve, that you were here to have this fantastic conversation with us about all of the wonderful value that children and teens have to share with the world. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate everything you do.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.